Have you ever wondered why some people uplift you while others drain you completely? One of the most essential skills we can develop is the ability to discern character wisely. This isn't simply about deciding whether we like someone or not. That's just personal preference, fleeting and unreliable. True discernment goes much deeper. It requires keen observation, an understanding of human nature shaped by both reason and experience, and the courage to act upon what we see. For, whether we wish to acknowledge it or not, the world is not devoid of those who harbor no goodwill toward us. It may seem severe to state it so plainly, yet reality is often unflinching. Some men and women act with malice, others with deception. There are those who manipulate, not out of ignorance or misguidance, but because they flourish in the ruin of others. If one does not cultivate the ability to recognize these patterns, one will unwittingly allow such individuals into the most sacred circles of life, naming them as friends, seeking their counsel as mentors, or trusting them as partners. And yet, instead of aiding in the growth of character, they serve as impediments, obstacles preventing the soul from becoming what it was meant to be. At this, some may protest, but ought we not to believe in the fundamental goodness of others? Should we not assume the best? There is something admirable in this inclination, yet it must be tempered with wisdom. To ascribe virtue to another without first observing their deeds is not faith, it is folly. And folly is perilous. When one stumbles about without sight, one does not merely fail to see danger, one falls headlong into it. Before one realizes, life has become entangled in relationships that exhaust, environments that erode, and influences that, little by little, unravel the very fabric of one's strength. How, then, does one guard against such dangers? How does one become skilled in recognizing those who do not act in good faith? The first and most crucial step is to pay attention, earnest, unwavering attention, to what people do rather than what they say. Words are the easiest of currencies. They cost little and can be spent extravagantly. Those who are most adept at deception will cloak themselves in fine speech, presenting an image of kindness, generosity, and wisdom. But for those who observe closely, there are always fractures in the mask. A reliable indicator of character is consistency. A man's words and actions must be in harmony, for where there is discord between them, deception often lurks. Those who promise loyalty but break trust at the first opportunity, those who speak of virtue yet live in deceit, those who claim to support but subtly undermine, these reveal themselves not by what they say, but by what they do. And herein lies the critical point. They count on you failing to notice. They rely upon your distraction, upon your tendency to take their words at face value. But if you train yourself to observe with care, to watch rather than merely hear, the illusion will begin to dissolve before your eyes. And once seen, such truths cannot be unseen. Another telling measure of a person's nature is how they treat those from whom they have nothing to gain. This is a trial that exposes the soul. Anyone can feign kindness when it serves their interests. Anyone can appear magnanimous when there is some reward at hand. But if you seek to discern the true character of a man, observe how he interacts with those beneath him, the waiter at the table, the laborer in the street, the one whose position offers no advantage to him. A person who treats the powerless with disdain is revealing something essential about himself. That cruelty will not remain confined. In time, it will seep into all areas of life. And if you allow such a one too near, you too will feel its sting. This brings us to deception, For deceit and manipulation are the chief instruments of the unscrupulous. It is through these means that they exert control, shaping circumstances to their advantage, while keeping their true motives hidden. The most skilled among them have honed this craft for years, some for lifetimes, refining the art of distorting reality itself. One of the most insidious tactics of deception is what modern politics calls gaslighting, a term which, when properly understood, describes the deliberate warping of another's perception so as to make them doubt their own faculties. It is, in effect, a battle for control over the mind, and it is alarmingly effective. For if someone can make you doubt your own memory, your own discernment, your own sense of reality, they have, in a sense, captured you. Such a person can recast themselves as the wronged party, when in truth they were the offender. They can persuade you that your natural reactions are unreasonable, that your grievances are unfounded. Over time, this erosion of confidence leads to something most dangerous of all, the inability to trust one's own judgment. And a soul that cannot trust itself is lost indeed. So then, how does one safeguard against such deceit? How does one fortify oneself against manipulation? The first and most important defense is to trust one's instincts. If something in an interaction feels amiss, if there is a dissonance between what is spoken and what is evident in action, heed that sense. Pay attention to the unease, for often it is the voice of wisdom whispering where words fail. Do not brush it aside. Do not attempt to explain it away with mere rationalizations. The mind, though often unable to immediately articulate its concerns, is remarkably attuned to inconsistencies. The first warning sign is that lingering sense of unease. If a person leaves you feeling bewildered, that in itself is cause for scrutiny. This is vital to understand, for when one is in the company of an honest and upright individual, there is no such fog of uncertainty. Communication is forthright, intentions are clear, and you possess a firm sense of where you stand. But with one who is deceptive, there is always an element of disorientation. One moment they are warm and gracious, the next distant and aloof. They sing your praises, only to soon undermine you. And in this emotional tumult, you find yourself questioning, is it I who am mistaken? Am I merely imagining things? You are not imagining things. The confusion is not accidental, it is deliberate. It is a calculated maneuver. And if you find yourself in a relationship, whether personal, professional, or even spiritual, where you are constantly doubting your own perception of reality, you must recognize this for what it is, a warning sign of the gravest sort. The next test is simple, yet revealing. Observe how a person responds when confronted with truth. This is a defining moment. A good man, one who values integrity, acknowledges when he has erred. He admits his fault and seeks to make amends. But a manipulator, one who operates in deception, will not do so. He will evade, he will redirect, he will twist the narrative until, astonishingly, you are the one under scrutiny. Present a legitimate grievance, and rather than engaging in honest discourse, he will lash out. He will turn to anger, to guilt, to diversion. He will make you feel as though your very act of raising the concern was the real offense. But this is not the natural resolution of differences. This is not the ebb and flow of normal human conflict. No, this is manipulation in its most insidious form. What then is to be done? The answer, though simple in theory, is far from easy in practice. You must step away. You must draw boundaries. There is no victory in debating those who have made a profession of distorting truth, for truth is not their currency. You cannot reason with one who has abandoned reason. And the most grievous mistake, one that many well-meaning souls make, is believing that such a person can be changed if only they are shown enough patience, enough love, enough second chances. But transformation is not forced upon the unwilling. And those who thrive in deception, those whose power lies in confusion and manipulation, have no desire to change, for their methods serve them well. They gain, they prosper, they revel in the discord they create. It is not your burden to rehabilitate them. It is your duty to safeguard your own well-being, to cultivate wisdom, and to seek the company of those who enrich rather than deplete your spirit. The future you shape, the peace you secure, the joy you preserve, all are contingent on the company you keep. If you permit the unscrupulous into your inner circle, the cost will be great indeed. Therefore, be watchful, be wise, and above all, heed the quiet yet persistent voice that warns when something is amiss. One of the surest signs of a truly dangerous individual is their unyielding refusal to accept responsibility, not merely for minor missteps, but as a fundamental pattern in their way of living. To confront their own flaws would be to acknowledge reality, and that they cannot do. Instead, they assign blame outward, perpetually casting themselves as the wronged party, the victim of circumstance, the innocent sufferer of others' misdeeds. And here is where you must take great care. If you do not train your discernment early, if you do not learn to recognize this trait for what it is, you may find yourself entangled for years, even a lifetime, in the tangled web of their self-deception. And I tell you, there is no burden more wearisome to the soul than the endless striving to reason with one who refuses to reckon with his own failings. Such a person will place upon you the weight of their own missteps, their own brokenness, and call it justice. It is, as I have written elsewhere, one of the oldest tricks of our adversary, to so twist the conscience that one cannot see where the true fault lies. And unless you guard yourself, you will find that the price is not only your peace, but perhaps even the clarity to see truth itself. The deceitful do not merely distort the truth with words. They weave entire narratives designed to absolve themselves of fault. In these carefully constructed tales, they are invariably the wronged party, the unappreciated intellect, the unjustly maligned. If one is not watchful, if one lacks the discernment to perceive such manipulation, one may find oneself drawn into their fabricated reality. And this, my friends, is perilous. Why so? Because the cornerstone of growth and wisdom is responsibility. To accept the weight of one's actions is to stand upon the firm foundation of self-improvement. You cannot mend what you refuse to acknowledge as broken. No soul can truly grow if it remains blind to its own failings. Thus, those who shun accountability do not merely deceive others, they deceive themselves. They fashion a world in which they remain faultless, and once such an illusion takes hold, it becomes a prison of their own making. And there is something else that must be said of these individuals. They do not walk alone. They seek out accomplices, those willing to carry burdens that are not theirs to bear. These enablers, often well-meaning, kind-hearted people, become the crutch that sustains the illusion. And this is a curious thing, is it not, that the wicked so often entangle themselves with the good? But the reason is plain. Those who refuse to carry their own responsibility must find others to bear it for them. If you are a person of integrity, one who believes in justice, one who sees the good in others and extends them the benefit of the doubt, then you are precisely the sort of person such deceivers seek. You may excuse their failings, perhaps attributing them to a troubled past, or believing that with patience they will change. And all the while, they use your goodness as a shield against the consequences of their actions. But let us follow this road a little further. What becomes of a man who refuses to take ownership of his failings? Over time, he becomes filled with bitterness, and bitterness is a poison to the soul. If a man lives his life blaming others for his misfortunes, he will before long come to believe that the world itself is against him. He will see conspiracies where there are none, injustice where there is only consequence, and he will begin to justify all manner of wrongdoing in the name of retribution. This is the root of so much misery, those who deceive not only to evade blame, but to punish those they hold responsible for their suffering. This is where we find the schemers, those who destroy friendships, who betray trust, who undermine their fellow man, not out of necessity, but out of a deep-seated conviction that life has been unfair to them. And the true tragedy is this: the further they retreat from responsibility, the more their world crumbles. For life, even when faced with courage and honesty, is no easy road. But to turn away from truth and responsibility is to make it all the harder. As Lewis once observed, "Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive." And so it is with the deceiver, who imprisons not only himself, but all who enable him, chaining them within his falsehoods until only ruin remains. Even when a man is diligent, when he holds fast to integrity, when he strives unceasingly for self-improvement, life remains arduous. Yet, should he cast off the weight of responsibility, life does not merely stay difficult, it descends into something far worse, a torment of his own making. For each time he shuns accountability, each time he refuses to learn from folly, each time he shifts the burden of his missteps onto another, he surrenders a piece of his own agency. This, I fear, is the great peril of the victim's mindset. It is all too common to hear a man murmur, "The odds are stacked against me," or "I cannot find joy because others hold me back." But he does not see that each time he utters such words, he strengthens his own chains. He is, unknowingly, instructing his soul in helplessness, convincing himself that he is no longer the protagonist of his own story. And what then? He becomes not a man, but a marionette, swayed by forces he believes beyond his grasp. Worse still, there are those who would have him stay that way, those who wish him to think that all is dictated by fate, by luck, by some great impersonal machinery of oppression. Such voices seek to keep him ensnared, for a man who believes himself powerless is a man easily led. But consider the moment he awakens, when he declares, "No, I am responsible for my course, and by God's grace I will alter it." That moment, that recognition, is the beginning of freedom. It is the instant in which he breaks free from the schemes of those who profit from his despair. He ceases to be their pawn, their subject, their excuse. So what then is to be done? How shall one guard against such insidious influence? The first step is clear: observe. If a man in your midst forever finds reasons why he is never at fault, if he habitually casts the blame upon another whenever misfortune befalls him, then beware. That is a warning sign, a subtle yet serious alarm, for if one does not take heed, he may find himself bearing the weight of another's sins. And what follows? He too will begin to believe that truth is mutable, that responsibility is a thing to be avoided, that one's own failures are but the work of others. If he does not resist this, he will find himself doubting what he once knew with certainty. And that is precisely what such deceivers desire. They wish to cloud his vision, to fill his mind with uncertainty. For a man who no longer trusts his own judgment is a man easily swayed, easily controlled. Thus, the path forward is plain. Take ownership of one's own life. Do not linger, awaiting another's permission to succeed. Do not let the feeble excuses of others become the foundation of one's own downfall. For in the end, there is but one fate worse than suffering under the influence of a man who shirks his duty, becoming such a man oneself. And if one is not vigilant, if one lingers too long among those who evade accountability, he may wake one day to find himself in that very pit. So be watchful, be discerning. Never permit another's negligence to become the anchor that drags you downward. Among the most ruinous of human failings, one that often creeps unnoticed, is envy. It does not approach boldly, announcing itself as the thief of peace. No, it slithers in quietly, often cloaked in the guise of concern, wrapped in the false warmth of friendship, or even familial affection. But beneath its pleasant mask, it festers and schemes, seeking to corrode all that is good. And make no mistake, those who truly wish to see a man brought low, those who seek not his flourishing, but his downfall, are often those in whom envy runs deepest. They cannot bear the sight of your success. To witness your growth unsettles them, for in their minds, your advancement is not merely a victory of your own, but a condemnation of their own stagnation. And here, dear reader, is where the seed of bitterness takes root. For mere envy may smoulder in secret, a private sorrow of the heart, but resentment, that is another matter entirely. Resentment is a weapon. It is no longer the quiet wish that they had what you possess. It is the conviction that you ought not to have it at all. If they cannot rise, they reason, neither should you. Let us connect this to what we have already explored. I have spoken to you before about discernment, about the necessity of perceiving the nature of those who surround you before they have the chance to bring ruin upon your life. Here again is one of those dangers. It is a creeping, malignant thing. And should you fail to recognize it early, it can corrode not only your relationships, but also your very sense of purpose and confidence. We have discussed deception, have we not? The way in which falsehood cloaks itself in concern. Well, envy is no different. Those who harbor it will rarely, if ever, confess it plainly. No, that would demand too much integrity. Instead, they will drape their resentment in the guise of wisdom or caution. You have encountered this before, I am sure. You share your ambitions, your vision for something grand, and instead of encouragement, you are met with subtle daggers of doubt. Ah, but that is a difficult path, they murmur. Are you certain you are suited for such an undertaking? Most who attempt this fail, you know. I would hate to see you disappointed. Do you see the deception? They present themselves as protectors of your well-being, guardians of your hopes. But in truth, their words are chains meant to bind you in place. They see your ascent, and it unsettles them. And so, rather than rise alongside you, they seek to anchor you where they feel safe. Now, you might wonder, could it be that they mean well? Could it be that they are simply pragmatic? But ask yourself this: would they extend the same counsel to another? Would they utter these same words if it were their own success at stake? Those who wrestle with envy tend to be predictable in this regard. They reserve their discouragement for those they perceive as rivals. And here we must speak of accountability. As we have observed before, those who are of ill character are loath to acknowledge their own failings. And what follows from such avoidance? Envy. For when one refuses to face the reality that their misfortunes are born not of fate, but of their own choices, the only recourse left is to cast blame upon another. And whom do they blame? Those who are rising, those who press forward while they remain mired in their own inaction. Instead of looking inward and admitting, perhaps I should labor more diligently, perhaps I must choose more wisely, perhaps I ought to challenge myself further, they murmur. It is unjust. Others were given advantages. They merely had better fortune. They are undeserving. And from this place of self-deception, resentment festers. And what happens when resentment is left to fester? It does not remain contained. It spills into action, into speech, into the very manner in which they engage with you. And here lies the true peril. Envy, once given room to grow, breeds sabotage. Sometimes it appears in whispers of passive scorn, in veiled criticisms, in the withdrawal of support when it is most needed. Other times it takes a bolder shape, falsehoods whispered in corners, efforts to undermine, to discredit, to diminish. And often the true danger is this: you may not see it coming, for such individuals often first appear as allies, as well-wishers. Have you ever known one who, at the outset, seemed to rejoice in your triumphs, but whose countenance changed the moment you exceeded them? Be it in career, in love, in wisdom. Suddenly, the warmth cooled, the words grew sharp, the presence became a weight rather than a comfort. This is the nature of envy left unchecked. It does not merely reside in the heart, it seeps into the very fabric of how one treats others. And so, my dear reader, I urge you, be vigilant, be discerning. Not all who smile at you celebrate your victories. Not all who offer counsel do so with your best interest at heart. Recognize these patterns for what they are, and do not allow the bitterness of another to become the stumbling block to your own calling. Perhaps they began to withdraw, their warmth cooling into something distant and unfamiliar. Perhaps they ceased to acknowledge your accomplishments, speaking of them as though they were of little consequence. Perhaps their words, once encouraging, turned subtly, sometimes not so subtly, toward unwarranted criticism. This is the work of resentment, a slow corrosion of the soul. And the danger, if you are not vigilant, is that their envy might take root in you. If you fail to see what is unfolding, you may begin to doubt yourself. Their whispered scorn becomes your own inner voice. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps I am undeserving. Perhaps I ought to step back, quiet down, cease striving so earnestly. But do not be deceived. This is precisely the outcome they desire. Not because they hate you personally, but because your growth forces them to confront their own stagnation. And that is an unbearable weight for the envious heart to carry. If you remain small, they are spared from reckoning with their own failures. If you make yourself less, they need not feel the discomfort of being less themselves. But now, consider the other side of this matter, because painful as it may be, the lesson is not theirs alone to learn. You must ask yourself, have I too fallen into the trap of envy? Do you find yourself resenting others' success? Does your heart shrink at the sight of someone else flourishing? Beware, for envy is not merely a passing temptation, it is a poison that eats away at the soul. Left unchecked, it does not simply embitter you, it consumes you entirely, and so the only remedy is to tear it out at the root. The proper response to another's success is not resentment, but learning. Instead of whispering, "Why them and not me?" ask, "What have they done that I have neglected to do?" Do not seek to diminish them. Rather, observe them. Study their habits, their discipline, their perseverance. Let their example inspire rather than embitter you. And if you find yourself surrounded by those whose hearts are twisted by jealousy, who disguise their disdain beneath polite words, or who openly scorn your progress, then you must make a choice. Either you allow them to draw you into their small and stifling world, or you rise above and leave them behind. There is no middle path, for if you linger too long among those who despise success, you will begin to share their mindset. And that, above all, is the surest way to ruin yourself, for nothing sabotages potential so thoroughly as the slow, creeping embrace of mediocrity disguised as humility. You see, truly dangerous people do not come with warnings branded upon their foreheads. They do not announce their ill intentions. But if you are watchful, if you cultivate discernment, you will begin to recognize the patterns. You will see who genuinely rejoices in your victories and who secretly delights in your failures. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you recognize envy for what it is, an admission of another's insecurity, not a reflection of your worth, you strip it of its power. You cease searching for approval from those who never intended to give it. You stop explaining yourself to those who refuse to understand. And most importantly, you release yourself from guilt over outgrowing those who refuse to grow themselves. For at the end of it all, your journey is not about them. It is about the measure of what you have been given and how far you are willing to go in fulfilling it. If another cannot bear to witness that, it is their burden to carry, not yours. But do not, for their sake, make yourself less than you were meant to be. There is too much at stake. You have been entrusted with too much to waste, trying to win the applause of those who would never cheer for you, no matter what you did. Now, let us be clear. I do not speak of those who occasionally struggle with perspective. We all stumble in that way. No, I speak of those who fundamentally lack concern for the weight of their actions upon others. The sort who, when confronted with your suffering, do not see it as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. This is something you must recognize, for if you do not, you will make excuses for them. You will imagine that they can be changed, or worse, you will begin to believe that their treatment of you is somehow deserved. Let us return to the idea we first discussed: awareness, the ability to discern. This is one of the most crucial signs you must learn to read. For if you fail to perceive when someone lacks empathy, you open yourself to profound harm. These people do not merely hurt others by accident. They do it with precision, and they do it without remorse. More insidiously, they often do so in ways that at first appear harmless, almost imperceptible. How does such a deception work? Think again of manipulation, of deception. The one who lacks empathy is often a master of both. Why? Because they do not bear the weight of moral responsibility as you do. They do not feel guilt. They do not feel shame. And so, if you wish to guard your heart, you must train yourself to see, not merely with your eyes, but with wisdom, not in the way that those with a moral compass do. If they deceive you and are found out, they do not experience the sting of conscience. Instead, they are vexed, aggrieved not by the wrongdoing itself, but by the inconvenience of exposure. This reveals something fundamental about their nature. Reality is not something they acknowledge, but something they manipulate, bending it to their own ends. Have you ever encountered someone who made you doubt the legitimacy of your own feelings, the soundness of your own reactions? You express your hurt, only to be met with a gaze that suggests you are absurd, as though the very act of voicing your pain is an offense. This is not mere misunderstanding. It is a deliberate maneuver. It is designed to make you question yourself so profoundly that you cease to resist. For once, a person is uncertain of his own emotions. Once he begins to suspect his own perception of truth, he becomes malleable. And if another can dictate what you feel, they can, in turn, dictate what you do. This leads us seamlessly to the third point, the absence of accountability. Why do they refuse to acknowledge their wrongdoings? The answer is stark. Without empathy, there is no inner compulsion to care about the damage inflicted on others. If a man is devoid of remorse when confronted with the harm he has done, why would he ever admit fault? He would not. Instead, he deflects, casting blame upon the wounded. "You are too sensitive," he might say. "You misunderstand. You are always making a fuss." Do you see the pattern? This mindset is ruinous because responsibility is the bedrock of growth. A soul that never admits fault never improves, and one that does not improve does not merely stagnate, it deteriorates. Deprived of accountability, a man slides further into darkness, becoming more entrenched in deceit and cruelty. And here is where things take a sinister turn. This downward spiral breeds envy and resentment. Why does a person who shirks responsibility also tend toward bitterness? Because when a man refuses to reckon with his own failures, he must assign them to others. He resents those who thrive, who love, who build. He scorns their joy because it reminds him of his own barrenness. It is a venomous cycle, for such resentment does not simply consume its host, it seeps outward, corroding the lives it touches. Have you ever known someone who could not bear your success? Someone who, when you accomplished something good, found a way to belittle it, to turn it into something shameful? That is the fruit of resentment. It is not mere jealousy. It is the conviction that your triumph is an affront to them. And here is the most grievous truth. Such malice often comes not from strangers, but from those closest to us, family, friends, colleagues. Those whom we expect to rejoice with us are too often the ones who secretly hope to see us fail. And this, once again, brings us back to the matter of empathy. For when a man lacks it, resentment does not remain an internal affliction. It takes action. He will scheme to hinder you, sometimes subtly, through whispered doubts and casual slights. Other times, the attack is more blatant, spreading falsehoods, usurping your efforts, sowing division. And what makes it all the more chilling is that, in his own mind, he believes himself justified. He persuades himself that you deserve to be brought low, that you are to blame for his own inadequacy. Perhaps you are thinking, yes, I see the nature of such people, but what then? How does one contend with them? And that, my friend, is the most pressing question of all. How to guard yourself against their influence. For if you fail to guard yourself, such individuals will leave you utterly depleted, draining your strength, sapping your resolve, and eroding your sense of worth. They diminish you, not for any noble purpose, but simply to elevate themselves. This you must not permit. What then is to be done? The first and most difficult step is to turn away, not merely with your feet, but with your heart, your mind, and your spirit. You must cease yearning for their validation. You must relinquish the hope that they will change, for they will not, unless, of their own volition, they choose to do so. And those who wield such corrosive influence seldom make that choice. When a man repeatedly reveals his nature, when he demonstrates beyond doubt that he lacks compassion, that he refuses to bear responsibility, that he despises your flourishing, you must take him at his word. And in that recognition, a moment of clarity arises. The moment you decide to separate yourself from those who poison your well-being, an extraordinary shift occurs. You begin to draw toward you those of a different spirit, souls who uplift rather than diminish, who rejoice in your victories rather than resent them, who shoulder their own burdens rather than laying them upon your back. And it is in such a company that real transformation begins. For when you walk alongside the strong, the virtuous, the resolute, you find yourself becoming one of them. And all the time and energy once squandered in the futile task of mending the unrepentant is now poured into the noble labor of shaping your own life. But let there be no misunderstanding. This is not a path of ease. It demands fortitude. It demands a regard for one's own dignity. And for a season, it may demand that you tread through loneliness. The severing of toxic ties leaves an emptiness, and that void will beckon you, tempting you to return, to reach out, to make one final attempt at reconciliation. Resist, hold fast, for within that space, within that absence, something new will begin to take root, something richer, something of true worth. And in this, we find the deeper lesson. The life entrusted to you is brief, and your capacity for goodness and greatness is too vast to be squandered on those who neither cherish nor respect it. Therefore, let your boundaries be firm, your stewardship of your energy be wise, and above all, let your resolve be steadfast in your pursuit of the life you were meant to lead. And that, my friends, is the call before us. To walk boldly in the life God has given us, to guard our hearts, and to surround ourselves with those who reflect His love, His strength, and His truth. It won't always be easy, but it will always be worth it. Because when we let go of what holds us back, we make room for what God has in store. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relationships? How did it change your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I love hearing your stories. If this message spoke to you today, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue this journey together. And remember, God has called you to something greater. Walk in it. Until next time, stay strong, stay faithful, and may God bless you abundantly. See you soon.